Prakash Patel, who I don't know, sometime today, I hope is named director of the FBI. Suck on that, Washington. Some random people. Kash Patel and Derek Harvey. Nunez was forced to recuse himself by Paul Ryan. Why did Paul Ryan do that? He wanted his lackey, his running dog, Trey Gowdy, to work with Swalwell and work with Schiff. Who knew that? My two lawyers, Bill Burke and Alex Spiro, two of the best lawyers around, who defended me. My lawyers for that, and also Don McGann's lawyers and Reince Priebus's lawyers. Molly Hemingway nails it. Nobody stood up. The guys that stood up, like Mike Flynn, they were sending him to prison. The people that stood up, like Navarre and Bannon later, went to prison. And they're whining now. There's no rule of law. And President Trump, just to reiterate, if your number two pencil broke during this, Trump took a bullet and then he won a landslide. I think that is the summary. He represents the anti-system forces of people that realized that we never intended, the founders and framers never intended this to be an empire. And a globalist empire run by a bunch of elites that have a credentialed class grundoons that are all in your life, every aspect of it, and worried about woke and worried about, the Russian-speaking border in Ukraine, worried about everything except what builds this nation and makes its citizens more prosperous and at peace and enjoying the fruits of liberty. He gets to pick who he wants to pick. And this is, I'm telling you, and I said this, the John Thune situation, you can't give them an inch. You can't give the established order. You cannot try to compromise with them, whether they got a Republican on their forehead or they got a Democrat, because it's all the same. It's all the same.
So yeah, we're back with brother and pastor Eric John Phelps here, and we wanted to take a little time with him to discuss his upcoming book, which I believe the primary title is 1933, and I think it has a subtitle as well. What was the name of your upcoming book, sir?
The title will be March 9th, 1933, when the Jesuits captured America.
Okay, good. I just wanted to make a little note of that. So yeah, that's interesting. I know I'm trying to work on a book as well. I know how difficult and laborious a task. It can be very time consuming, to say the least.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is, and I feel a book needs to be written on that topic as it relates to the Jesuits, and they're plotting to conquer the United States for 100 years prior to that day. And since I've been teaching my private citizenship class, I have all the details there. So I can just put them in my book and keep it very simple for the readers. It's not going to be over 100 pages, so that they can see March 9th, 1933 is the day we lost it all. And we were conquered, we were given a military government, and the president is commander-in-chief first, and he works for the Jesuits for them, controlling the Archbishop of New York City. And that's the power structure here under the Second Republic that's run with a military government, made an empire out of it.
Yeah, I was just speaking to my a friend of mine the other day, and we were discussing how we often have about how if you look at the front gate of Georgetown University, it's this enormous wrought iron gate, and it says on the front, it says 1789, which is a really peculiar year because this particular year is the center of the particular extinguishment or the suppression of the Society of Jesus under first Pope Clement the 13th, and then ultimately the 14th. Clement the 14th would be the one to actually survive long enough to seal the deal, and to with their intention through the papal bull was to extinguish the Jesuit Society, the Society of Jesus forever, and get rid of it. And of course, they were able to survive all during that period underground by various means, and to come back and to ultimately get a pope who was under their control and bring themselves kind of back to resurrect themselves, I guess, from the dead, as it were. So, and they like to call this the restoration, right? That's a very positive sounding word, the restoration of the society.
That's right, under Johannes Ruthen. Johannes Ruthen was one of the most vicious, calculating generals they ever had. And there's a book called The General Who Rebuilt the Jesuits. And it's about Johannes Ruthen. He was a Dutchman. And brought them back to power. Back when Jacob Leone, the novice there, who wrote The Jesuit Conspiracy in 1846, he said Ruthen was there. Jesuit General Ruthen was there. They were plotting how to get all their power back through confiscating gold and creation of wars. And it's just a riveting read if you've never read it. It's called The Jesuit Conspiracy by Jacob Leone.
No, I mean, to have that level of cunning, it's diabolical. I mean, you once said that you thought that they were all demon possessed, and I guess you would have to spend so much time and energy of your own life just like focusing on how to be just such a destructive, like a lethal force in the world. And it's incredible, and to do it all behind the pretense of Jesus Christ and austerity and ministry and charity is quite vile and quite heinous, really.
Open but false policy, secret but true.
Right.
It's all.
Well, we were just listening to recently. A few of my friends were listening to this Geopolitics and Empire episode. It's a podcast, and they have a gentleman on there, and he's talking. He's doing a pretty good job, of breaking down the conspiracy. He talks about the Dulles brothers and the City of London and the Fabian Society and B'nai B'rith and Bush. But at some point along the way, he slips, and this gentleman who is a neurosurgeon, really, and he starts to talk about ultimately the Jews and Zionism, and ultimately he goes into this whole kind of focus on the issue at the top level of the conspiracy being the state of Israel. And so I wonder how much genius goes into this propaganda that allows people to do this, to take it upon themselves to find out what's going on, and ultimately they find the conspirators, they find the villain, and it's the Jews.
Yeah, that theory's been around for 100 years now, and that theory did not exist until you had the Khazarian Jew theory that started to be propagated in the early 1900s. There was no such thing as considering Jews as Khazarian before that time. There's a couple books written on it. Well, one's called The Jews of Khazaria by Kevin Allen Brooke, and there's another one called The 13th Tribe by Kessler. And those are two important books because they're going to tell you that the racial Jews have ceased to exist.
Right.
And the Jews today are Khazarians. They're out of Khazar. So therefore, if that's the case, then the Jews in Israel are Khazarians. And if that's the case, they have no right to the land. And if that's the case, put the argument completely in the hands of the Arab Muslims in the land of Israel. So it's a very clever argument.
It kind of smacks of some kind of like Persian or maybe Arabian conspiracy theory. It's kind of a lowbrow, not very historically astute perspective about history. This Khazarian thing and the Khazarian Empire, and so people like rubes are very easily taken in by it. And of course, there's the protocols of the learned elders of Zion, which kind of like chimes in with this as well, and kind of like it alludes toward this world conspiracy, which we've talked about before, and it always paints the Jews as the ultimate arbiter, the Rothschilds or what have you, and it reminds me of like what ultimately Germany was in the throes of, with Hitler. He had kind of a feeling for the anti-Semitic conspiracy theories of the time, and he was really like channeling that.
Well, that's what a Mein Kampf has. Talks about the international Jew, and it's the Jews that took over Christian Russia with the Bolshevik Revolution, and therefore we're going to attack Russia, and we're going to free up all those Christian people. I mean, Mein Kampf is one of its basic doctrines is the Jew is the problem. They run everything, and so Stalin hated the Jews just as much as Hitler did, and that's why they worked together in the purging of the Pale of Settlement in Poland, where 3 million Jews were there. And I found that number in the early 19th century encyclopedia. So it was all about that, and then once you purge them out, you kill them, and then what's left, you drive them to the revived Latin kingdom of Jerusalem. Because remember, Israel today is looked upon by the Pope as not Israel, where the Jews have a right to their land. That's why the Pope's always against them. Always rule against or vote against them in the UN, the Pope's UN, that they have no right to their land and they need just have a two-state solution, all that nonsense. So it all goes back to whether or not the racial Jews have been preserved, which they have according to the Bible and true history, and whether or not they still then have a right to that land, which they do. So if they're preserved and they have a right to the land, then it should be theirs and shouldn't be a problem. But see, the Pope has to continue the agitation. That's why the Pope used Donald Trump to not facilitate the ending of the Gaza war, or that Israel would ultimately lose, because it's still going to be an Arab-Muslim holding where they're going to continue to shoot their rockets and whatever into Israel. So that the Jesuits will not allow the Arab-Israeli conflict to ever end until the final Pope of Rome ends it with the beginning of the 70th week of the years of Daniel.
So let's just take a little minute here, just take a brief moment, take a little beat, and just divert our attention over here to Dr. Jack Cruz. He's over there in Geopolitics and Empire. And I just noticed during the little intro discussion that they had an interesting point of view to highlight for us. So let's go ahead and take a listen to this.
My parents actually told me, maybe you should talk to some rich people. And that's kind of what I did. And the guy that started me off really on understanding history and not trusting the government, believe it or not, was a Zionist banker who owned the Sterling National Bank on 57th and Madison. His name was Theodore Silbert. He was one of the first presidents of B'nai B'rith in New York. And he's the one that taught me about fractional reserve banking, taught me about the history of the Rockefellers, the Rothschilds, Jekyll Island, how the whole system works, and told me the good, bad, and ugly of that entire system. And then I had another benefactor who I've never really talked about in any podcast. His name is Frank Scharf. He was an attorney that worked for Equitable Life, an insurance company. And he told me the inside baseball of how that system worked, with medicine, the law, and banks. And then basically they dropped me into the Museum of Natural History. And I started following all the rich kids around that signed up for these classes. And what did I assimilate? I assimilated a lot of knowledge on a lot of different topics as a young child. And that's actually, I think, what fueled me asking some of the key questions. And you heard what I said to you before you hit record. I said, if you want to do a good podcast with me, you got to ask good questions. But I would flip it back to you and say, that's actually how Jack Cruz became Jack Cruz, because very early age, I'm telling you, when I was 2, 3, 4 years old, I was probably the most inquisitive kid you'll ever meet. I drove my parents crazy. I drove the people and adults around me crazy because I asked questions that a lot of people either couldn't answer or didn't want to answer. But I was fortunate that those adults directed me to places where I could get the answers.
Yeah, and some of those details you give in your, I was listening to, I think, 7 hours of your chat with Robert Breedlove last night. You give details there. And so I focus a lot on the big picture, geopolitics, globalism, COVID 1984. I got into trouble myself covering some of that stuff early on in 2020. I got banned by the DHS from PayPal, from Patreon, and so forth, for the people that I've been interviewing. And, if you could sort of give us your synthesized theory of everything, as I like to say it, you've spoken of at length in your interviews, the historical deep state, going back centuries in history, the military industrial complex. I believe you've said America can't really heal and move toward freedom until the truth about JFK is revealed. And so just your further thoughts on who's running the ship, what are their plans and end game? Things just seem progressively to be getting worse, and why are they doing it and so forth?
Well, I mean, the why they're doing it is simple. It's about control and power. They want to take us back to feudalism in medieval times. Why? They want us to be economic serfs on the plantation. The difference is right now, everybody is a Black African American in the world, 8 billion of us. You don't need black skin to be a slave anymore. The system has been built for a variety of different reasons, but it really starts with the covert 12 families, that sit above the Rothschilds and Rockefellers. The Rothschilds and Rockefellers get a lot of the blame because they're the front face, of the Trilateral Commission, the Council of Foreign Relations. You've heard my recent takedowns of the Cali Means and his sister. Why? Because they are just a new iteration of the old guard. And that's why I always tell people that you have to know your history and not trust the government, because the government for 250 years in the United States actually has been taking our freedoms away sequentially over time. That's exactly what the Fabians do and what they started doing, in Queen Victoria's England. And what was the goal of this? Well, if you know your history from 1776 to like 1840, the Queen wanted to get a lloydial title of the United States back. They lost it in 1776. They were behind why Lincoln was killed, why the Civil War went down the way it went down. Then nothing got solved, and we wound up in World War I. Then the very classic Fabians who were implanted. You've heard Klaus Schwab talk many times that we have people planted all over the world. Well, before Klaus Schwab and Henry Kissinger ever existed, the two plans for who were loyal to the royal family were John Foster Dulles and Allen Dulles. And people are really shocked to find out that both of them were involved in the Treaty of Versailles. Well, you need to understand what the Treaty of Versailles was. It was a guarantee that we would get World War II. And then when you realize that John Foster Dulles dies before JFK is taken out in 1959, but you find out that JFK had to fire Allen Dulles, and that's part of the reason why all these stories link together. And you have to realize that the intelligence agencies in the United States and Israel were basically formatted by guys like Dulles, guys like the Bush family from ONI. When you understand where these tentacles come from, then it becomes easier to really make a diagnosis on the last 125 years. And my day job, what I am, I'm a neurosurgeon, I'm a brain surgeon. So I would tell you I believe this is a easy thing for a surgeon to do, because making the diagnosis when you have disparate pieces of information and you continue to ask questions and go deeper and deeper and deeper, all of a sudden you begin to see where the tentacles coalesce on the head of the octopus.
So this is a really fascinating discussion here with Dr. Jack Kruse here, and he brings a lot of interesting things to light. Of course, Kennedy was assassinated in 1969, not 1959, and we have to go a little bit deeper, just as Jack discusses, because ultimately what we're trying to do here is understand what's going on behind these different facades and these coverts, camouflaging the intention and the personalities and the conspiracy in history, right? So it's important here that in order for Jack to have a really good and intelligent conversation regarding the Dulles brothers and individuals like Bush, we've got to go back to Yale campus. We've got to go back to the MI5, MI6 controlled Skull and Bones Order 322, right? And of course, this is going to be the mechanism of control that's going to be in place since the 1820s, since the destruction of the control of Freemasonry with the anti-Masonry party in the historical event of the John Morgan affair. And I think that the choice of the Morgan family as a good investment banking apparatus within the United States by the Rothschilds and the British, part of using, selecting the name Morgan is in order to cover up the John Morgan affair, which was exploding across America, was exploding across the news presses and the chatter within the society, within America. And this is an important time because, just as Jack Kruse talks about, he talks about this period between 1776 and the 1840s. And that's exactly where we have to arrive here. We have to arrive at this point in history, which is cloaked in this occult darkness. And of course, something interesting happened between 1773 and the 1820s, and that, of course, was the suppression of the Jesuit society, right? The suppression of the Society of Jesus, which, of course, is the word they use now in order to lighten the blow, but at that time, it was the extinction of the Jesuit society. It was intended by the papacy at that time, Clement XIII, and then the Clement XIV, who ultimately routed and removed the Jesuit order. Was intended that they would never, ever come back. They were extinguished. They were gone. They were exterminated. But of course, they were not disappeared. They did not necessarily obey the command of their liege lord in the form of the Roman papacy, but they went about to go underground and form the Illuminati out of Ingolstadt University in Germany, at the University of Canon Law, and supposedly Adam Weishaupt was an ex-Jesuit. There's all this framing of history and all this obfuscation of the facts. So let's get Dr. Jack Kruse all straightened out here. And so what was really happening in America, we can go look at the Georgetown University and stand in front of their magnificent wrought iron gates and look at their gates, and it says 1789, Jack, 1789. 1789 is during the extinction or the suppression of the Jesuits between 1773 and 1820. And during that time, they would be busy in Britain, in Russia, and in America building their universities. And if you look at the Georgetown University, it looks more like a war college. It looks more like a fortress built for manning a military operation. And that's exactly what it's built for. It's built for the military operation of taking down the United States and bringing it under control. And of course, your acumen about the Fabians and about the British sovereignty, the British world, the Crown Corporation of England, of this inner city of London, trying to get control of its colonies back. Of course, that's an already foregone conclusion since the revolution in 1776. They continuously would be trying to find a way to get their colonies back. And they didn't have the manpower, the ships, and the gunpowder to do it. But they would have ultimately introduced Jekyll Island. They would introduce families like Morgan and Rockefeller. And these would be the new Rothschild agencies, right? The new investment banking apparatuses for the crown into America, and that's how they would become so drastically wealthy and how they become titans and huge magnates. It wasn't just because they were so intelligent and the economy of America was so promising that it produced such wonderful, right, development. Of course, those things were financed into place. just like the Civil War was financed into place. And of course, this idea of moving the world into this place of being enthralled to economic servitude and slavery, to the City of London banking operations. Of course, that's what the Federal Reserve System does. Those are what those banks, those 15 or 20 banks, that private banks that govern the Federal Reserve, are ultimately banking conglomerates that are just holding companies for the banks of England and the banks of London. All right, so we understand that completely. We understand totally that the inner temple and the round temple and the chancery, right, of inner city of temple, the crown church, right? We understand that was established by the papal knights. Papal knights, Templar knights and papal knights of Malta were involved centrally, in a centralized way, in establishing and upholding the financial backing and the sovereign immunity and the exclusivity of inner city of London and the square mile over and against everything outside of that, which is a regular, London proper, right? So you have London proper, the massive city, and then inside you have the square mile, the inner city of London. And inside there you have this sovereignty and this privacy, this exclusivity. Even the king or queen, when they come in, they have to touch the sword handle of the mayor who comes out, right? And they have to wear all that, the regalia and the pomp and circumstance of coming in the golden coach with the horses, right? To replay the past, right? And so this is what we're really looking at. But of course, what Jack Kruse fails to understand is the dominance of the Order of the Society of Jesus, who was, of course, brought back into being after fighting against the forces of the Holy Roman Empire, the Roman Catholic Church, and reasserting secretly its will and its power over princes and courts and nations around the world. And after 1820, they reasserted themselves and came back into being, I would say, right after 1813, right after the War of 1812, right after the British make their attack and their marauding advance into America through the north, through the Hudson, through Canada, right? They come down and they attack, they burn the White House, they do all the things that they capture the allodial titles, they probably take a massive amount of gold and resources with them when they leave, and they are signing off on their desperate effort to make a military foray into America in order to reconquer their territories. So the territories are massive, no way to hold them. So it's going to turn the empire, the British Empire at that point will turn now to the banking lords and the banking elite to bring America under control through fractional reserve, banking, compounding debt, interest, right? Compounding interest on the debt. So it behooves us now to recognize how this anti-Semitism is creeping in, because people get to the bottom of this conspiracy and they start to point at the Jews and Jerusalem and the Zionists and B'nai B'rith, and then they arrive at the final, like the John Birch Society, they arrive at the final analysis of all their deep researches to blame the Jews, right? It's some kind of like stunning manufacture of sophisticated propaganda, anti-Jew hate propaganda, right? Pretty soon you'll be reading the learned protocols of the elders of Zion. And you'll be like Adolf Hitler. You'll be marching around trying to save the motherland or whatever, right? Or the fatherland. I guess that's more masculine, right? There you go. So, look, guys, I mean, if you have to understand now that in order to be able to come to a correct conclusion, we have to be able to confront our own bias. And if you're going to stand in the background like Alex Jones and all these guys, and you're just going to defend the papacy in a low-key, nonchalant way, because you have to wave the flag of Christmas time and have the Christmas tree, and you have to have Santa Claus, because that's how you were inculcated when you were a baby, right? You can tell when people were inculcated as a baby and were molested with this idea of Romanism at an early age, because they can't shake it when they get older, right? It's deeply ingrained. It's deeply entrenched. It's deeply rooted in the psyche, not the spirit, but the psyche and the mind and the flesh, right? So that's what it does. Like, oh, I can't wait to get up in the morning and see what Santa brought me, right? So that psychology prevails in an infantile way continuously as we move forward. And so people can't confront Romanism. They can't confront the papacy. They can't confront the thrallment that the world is in to these conspiracies and to these banking lords and the Rothschilds, right? And all they see is Jews everywhere, right? And they know that they know their front men, that they're placed there to be the face and the countenance and the identity of the conspiracy, but they can't see past it. They know that there's an upper level of bloodline families there, like the black nobility, right? The Italian nobility and elite. The Italian nobility were noble and elite and rich 1,000 years before the British ever came into being, right? 1,000 years before there was ever an Englishman. The black nobility and the Italian power elite already knew how to run the show. And of course, Britannia and Londinium was just the farther outer reaches of their empire, of the Roman Empire, right? That's why they built Hadrian's Wall there. They built Hadrian's Wall right there outside of Londinium because it was the outer reaches of the empire, of the Roman Empire, guys. So the Brits, the new empire, the new Roman Empire, over by Hadrian's Wall in Londinium. So people can't figure it out. They got to go to the Jews. No, unfortunately, you got to peel the layer back, which is most dear to yourself. And you have to look within to find that you, the Gentile people, you, the Gentile world, is behind the conspiracy. Not Jews, right? So it always comes back to this confederacy that Christ found when he walked into Jerusalem, it was this confederacy between the Roman Empire, who was buying out the nobility and the elites with elite capture in Jerusalem. And they were buying out Jewish lords and scribes and Pharisees and Sadducees and the king. Right? They were buying out all the necessary people they needed to buy out to control the region and to betray the people. That's what Christ found. That's what the crux of Christianity is. Right? It's this process of saving and pulling back the Jews from this betrayal and pulling them back from this confederacy with Romanism. And so now that you guys are trying to peel back the conspiracy and understand what the theory is, you're now blaming the Jews. No, my friends, it's the Roman element. It's the Gentile element. It's in Scripture. It's in prophecy. It says that the Lord Jesus, he was talking about the prophecies, and if you go back to the idea that the Gentiles will trodden down the holy places until the time of the Gentiles is at an end. That's what we're dealing with. Until this fulfillment of Jesus Christ, the fulfillment of Christianity, the messianic fulfillment comes, we're in the time of the Gentile, the time of the Romans, the time of the Roman legions, and the superiority and the dominance of universal Roman Pax Romana across the face of the earth. The dominion of the Pontifex Maximus under Julius Caesar. And of course, that title, that titular occult throne, that black magical title, right, would pass down from generation to generation like the Lord of the Rings, right? It would be the ring would use up each of its victims and then roll down the road and pass on through another generation to the next person, right? That's what this title does. That's what the Pontifex Maximus title does. It continues to live on. It's vivified with demonic spiritual energy. And eventually the popes of Rome are stood up in the vanity and the avarice of the banal human frailty of man. And they're going to accept these titles, and they're going to become the popes of Rome, and they're going to become Constantine, who ultimately is a sun worshiper. So you can see that the entire system of Romanism is established as a sun cult to astrotheology and sun worship and the worship of the sun god, of Helios or Apollos or whatever you want. If you look in front of the Vatican, they have that ridiculous phallic obelisk, right, associated with Julius Caesar and Egypt, probably, at the center in front of the St. Peter's Square, and it's a huge sundial. So one time of the year, the setting sun hits the sundial and the obelisk, and it points this way like a clock, the shadow does. And then at a different time of the year, the spring equinox, the shadow points down here, and it's a huge sundial, guys. I mean, do I need to tell you this stuff? You guys are totally addicted and totally enslaved to a system of occult sun idolatry, to solar idolatry, and the worship of the sun deity. That's what the whole thing is. That's why the entire Vatican is encrusted with weird golden sun symbols everywhere, right? That's what the entire religion of Rome stood for thousands of years. It didn't change because Christ saw. They just added him to the nuance of their cult by putting him up on a Roman crucifixion cross and nailed him to it. And they carry him around in a stick. The Roman Pope comes around with his stick, and he's got Jesus skewered on there. The suffering, like writhing, pinned Jesus. Everyone like, oh, it's so holy. Oh, do the magic, Pope. Say the magical saying. And the sign of the cross, right? Like it's magic. Well, what is a cross? A cross is a Roman instrument of death. Do you know how many people were killed on crosses? Wait, Spartacus, right? I mean, how many hundred? Like, let's go back. Let's find out. Let's ask AI. Theoretically, how many people were skewered and murdered on Roman crucifixion posts? How many? 1 million? So Jesus is just another guy. He's the guy who makes the Roman crucifixion death famous. He makes it famous. Otherwise, no one else would even know it existed. Vlad the Impaler, right? He used to impale people. I mean, no one made a religion out of it. But this horrifying mutilation, death, offered by the Romans was made famous. The gory, ugly, disgusting, vile cross, which when we get to heaven, we're not going to see cross symbols everywhere, right? That's ugly. It's like having a guillotine, like a little guillotine symbol. I've used this one before. You've heard this one before. Like when you have a little guillotine symbol and you wear it like a medallion around your neck, and it's like holy. Like oh, here comes a vampire. Count Dracula's coming. Let me show him my guillotine. And then Dracula comes up and he sees the golden guillotine symbol around your neck, and he goes, ah, and he can't come any closer, right? Because he sees the guillotine, right? That's what you're talking about. You're talking about the cross is not a significant aspect of our religion as Christians. It's the fact that the Romans used their execution instrument to kill him. That's the point. And you are still Romanists, you're still papists, you're still running around with that? With the golden cross? Jesus isn't even on there anymore. It's just, this is the Roman instrument of death. It symbolizes to me my Messiah. It does. It's the way that they killed him. It symbolizes him to you. Because now I'm questioning you people. Mike Lindell, all you idiots, you guys are not Christians. You're Romanists. You're on the side of the Roman legion. You're on the side of the Roman soldiers who pinned him up there. You're on the side of Pontius Pilate, who washed his hands of it and just said, it's not my problem. I'm not dealing with it. You guys, have your man killed. You Jews, have your man killed. We're still in the same controversy. The world hasn't moved forward. We're still stuck in that very moment when the world goes dark and he's up there on the Roman cross and the earth shakes and everything is darkness and he says, my God, do not forsake me. Remember that? We're still stuck in that moment. The world hasn't moved past it. Everyone else wanted to stick him in the hole and roll back the rock and go on with their day and move past it. Half the city fell down. We didn't move past that. The world didn't. We didn't. The geopolitics of the world and the empire, we never moved past it. We're still there. We're still in this point where the Roman Empire is in the process of trying to betray, manipulate, and control the Jewish people and their promise, and even take over their religious promises in the books. That's what the Pope does. He takes all the claims and all the promises, all the passages of Scripture in the Bible that apply to Israel and to Jerusalem and to God's Holy Land and his temple, which is there, and he makes it about him. He says, oh, I'm in the temple of God here in Rome. I'm the man. I'm the high priest of Melchizedek or whatever, right? They're trying to maintain the religious order of Christ for him and kick the Jesus side. And they're the Rothschilds now. They're Zionists, B'nai B'rith, right? All these little buzzwords, little Jew-hating, false knowledge, pseudo-knowledge, pseudo-intellectual, propagandistic history from the brain surgeon. That's what we get. That's what we get, guys. Jew-hate, Jew-blame. So we're going to right the wrong on that. We'll get back to our conversation. We'll just kind of bring it back into line. But we have to correct the record there. We're shedding a lot of light. But we're not. There's not these certain doorways that we're going to just pass by and not open. No, we're going to open all these doorways. We're going to look at all these corners, guys. Even the corners that you most likely do not want to look in because it'll confront you. You personally will have to confront your own bias. You won't be able to kick the can down the road to some Jews over there, right? You'll have to ask the questions about Romanism, Roman Catholicism, the supposed state of Christianity in the world, because we've all known for a couple thousand years now that Roman Catholicism is not Christianity, right? It's Roman religion. If you want to find the Christianity of Christ that are in the books that Roman religion kept forbidden, The Roman religion would persecute and even murder you if you had some of these books. If you look in there and find Christ, you'll find that he has nothing to do with Rome. And that the papacy, the system of that geopolitical, physical, earthly power in the world, an earthly imperium and kingdom here, that claims to be the kingdom of heaven, it claims to have divine power, is of course the throne of the Antichrist. That's right. That's right. It's another word from our awesome sponsor, Wendy'sLimited.com. Wendy'sLimited.com is the hottest new styles in the fashion industry. You got to go check out Wendy'sLimited.com. And of course, Wendy's Boutique Limited is not sucked into all the vino and brainwash of the leftist political culture out there. We know what a woman is, and we're here to serve women. We're not here to be deceived by fake-looking dudes but dressed like women, right? No offense. And we're here to remind you that Wendy'sLimited.com is the leader in online boutique fashion design. We have our best selection of boutique couture, awesome designer trends, and the hottest limited catalog fashion anywhere. You got to come check out Wendy'sLimited.com. Our sponsor has been very generous and keeps us going here, so please come and check out the craze, Wendy'sLimited.com. I find it interesting that in this particular this individual in the podcast, just kind of referring back to that, he had an interesting breakdown discussing the Dulles brothers and George Bush, and I found it lacking that he couldn't find, even by doing some kind of like rudimentary internet search, any kind of connection with Skull and Bones at Yale, which goes back to like 1832, 1833, and when that particular kind of covert clandestine operation was going to be put into place at Yale, and right away they're going to have Taft, and they're going to have high power, elites coming through there immediately as like a chase for up the upper levels of power within our government. And of course, Bush ultimately and Kerry, they were ultimately individuals who were still operating on this particular secret brotherhood, or this kind of channel towards the Papal Knights, at a college level. And so I think it's fascinating that people could be so, that they could be so informed on the characters and the personalities in our own history, but not have any clue about what is operating in the background. So help us to understand how the society, the Skull and Bones Society, the Dulles brothers, and the Order of the Jesuits are connected in the background in a way that these guys they cannot see it. It's totally invisible.
Well, they don't want to see it. They're probably Catholics. They don't want to see it, even though you have the proof that Henry Robinson Luce was a Knight of Malta, Skull and Bones, and CFR. Or William F. Buckley, Knight of Malta, Skull and Bones, CFR. They don't want to make and both of them are Roman Catholic. Clare Boothe Luce was a Dame of Malta and switched from being a Baptist to a Catholic. They're all a bunch of Roman Catholic high knights. And Jeb Bush the same way, and George W. Bush, he's really a Catholic, just like Tony Blair converted to Catholicism. They know who the power is, and to blame the Jews for it is exactly what the Jesuits want. Because if a people blame the Jews, which is not true, running everything, then they'll persecute them, and when they persecute them, then they'll bring the curse of the Abrahamic covenant upon them, as was done to Russia, as was done to Germany in this 20th century.
No, I think you're right. I'm interested in seeing how things are going to play out in this new era with Trump. We moved pretty quickly. They're moving very rapidly, as you can see. And you can, now being, let's see, the beginning of 2025, or the beginning of February 2025, and you can see that the North American Union is now like on the table. And we were going back to look at these like old Club of Rome pictures back from like the 1990s when we were all like on dial-up internet and we were all conspiracy nuts. And we had these Club of Rome maps that showed Canada, Greenland, and Mexico all like shaded in green as like the 8th or 9th or 10th sector of the new world government.
Was Greenland in the North American Union?
In these Club of Rome maps that we have, it shows Canada, and then it shows a little swath, and it goes over and catches Greenland too. So yeah, Greenland and Canada and Mexico, all the way down to the tip, are all in this colored box that now Trump seems to be going after pretty hard. So that's why it's kind of shocking. I mean, I guess we shouldn't be surprised, right?
Trump has been their servant since he was a young man. So went to all the Al Smith dinners and with his father, Fred. He's a knight. He's connected to the Aldobrandini's. Pictures of him at the Aldobrandini party in Europe, and he's just he's one of them. And it's just amazing that the white people of this country don't get it. But then the white people of this country don't read the Reformation Bible anymore. So when they abandon that, then they abandon their minds, and they can't ever come to a real, serious, truthful, historical, present conclusion about these people.
No, I mean, I think you're right. I mean, I just noticed from just going on let's see, what is that one particular the app that we go on here? It's mainly a Russian. It's mainly a Russian app that we. It's like a social media app. Here, let me just look it up. I got you. Let's see here. I'll probably have to edit this a little bit. Telegram. So yeah, just by going on Telegram, I've been able to, there's a lot of information that goes around, and it shows Donald Trump's book, and it shows the page of his book highlighted where he talks about the Jesuits and having gone to a Jesuit college when he was younger and having got along with them quite well. He goes out of the way to mention that. And so, yeah, I mean, I think that on some level, I mean, Donald Trump has come out and admitting that he's a Protestant. And so I think that he's kind of set up. I mean, America could not possibly vote for Kamala Harris. She was such a disaster. So there really wasn't much of a choice there politically.
That's why they put her there, to make sure that they could bestow the kingship on Donald Trump. Yeah.
And he goes in with an incredible amount of power. That, I mean, somebody just, as it appears to us, tried to shoot his ear off, and then somebody blew up a truck bomb in front of his hotel, and then it's it's just been escalating. So this I mean, they've got to be on like DEFCON 3 by now,
That was nothing from the hotel. Furthermore, he was never shot, as you know, in the ear. That was all faked. So, all to create sympathy for him. So whatever he wants to do, everybody's going to say, well, we'll do what he says.
Yeah, I mean, I'm in shock about the thing where he gets his ear shot in front of everyone. I'm kind of like, I'm amazed, and I mean, I don't know what to make of it. I mean, obviously, it reminds me of when he was like still like a regular guy, and he was at the WWF with Linda McMahon and that whole operation with the professional wrestling. And he goes down there, and you might not have seen it, but there's a video where he takes one of the other wrestling guys and he like body slams him a little bit, and he's like a tough guy, Donald. It's like it's like play acting up there.
Let him body slam him. That's right.
Right, Vince McMahon. Right, they go down and they do what they always do. They just clown around and they're like pushing each other around, and it just kind of it reminds me of Donald Trump's propensity for showmanship, and. You know what I mean? It's stunning. You know what I mean? If someone was killed in the crowd, the one guy got his head the one guy was murdered. So
kill somebody, maybe
kill somebody, right? I mean, it's awful that we have to be so cynical and think along these lines, but I mean, there's really no choice.
Militarily,
right? Of course, militarily.
Strictly military. We'll fake his assassination, but we'll make sure we kill a decent guy or fireman to create more sympathy for Trump, and he'd fight. I have to laugh that black, savage, racist Joy Reid, who hates white people, she did tell the truth when she said that assassination was fake.
Right.
And look, she was removed from that MSNBC or whatever.
Right.
Yeah.
But she's coming from an adversarial point of view where she's looking at it with a degree of incredulity, I guess, and doubt and wondering what she's seeing. And we can count on her to be an animus against Donald Trump and be suspicious of such a thing. So on that level, she could be, she could see clearly for a moment of what might be really happening, which no one else could see, I mean, they got video of the guy crawling up there. I mean, it's very weird. I mean, do you think that we never ever saw marksmen and snipers sitting like posted up and right in front of Donald Trump before, other than this day when they're going to have a shooting, right?
Guy never shot anybody.
But did they kill him? Did they murder the guy on the roof over there? Did they shoot the guy with because they go over there and there's like a dead kid on the roof, right?
I'm sure he was MK Ultra.
Right, definitely MK Ultra. I mean, he was like on a BlackRock commercial, for the love of God. Like, no one wants to ask any questions. Are there any journalists in America? That's what I want to know.
Yeah, there aren't. They're all prostitutes. All of the networks are prostituted to the papacy. So it's only kooks like us that get the real truth out. And we have a chain of evidence to prove it.
No, it's true. I mean, when I think about, I'm looking at this scenario with Donald Trump and anyway, that idea, I just kind of lost track. Go ahead, carry on, sir.
I have a lady friend who took my class. Her name is Karen. She lives in Nebraska. She was a colonel in the Marines and she was a sharpshooter. She said there's no way that tumbling AR-15 bullet could have just grazed his ear. It had taken the whole thing off and then some. So, no, all faked.
Right.
And never be reported on. And you look at his ear, there's no scar on his ear. Just he's an actor. He shows how much hatred he has for us. To go along with this act of being shot, he hates us, especially the white men. He's setting us up for the biggest fall the white men ever took in this country.
Right.
We go into the.
No, that's my concern. When we were back when this all happened, before he was really like, he was kind of like, it was languishing in the polls maybe, or just, it was a very strange period. And then all of a sudden this happened, and it did kind of supercharge and animated the political right, the new right in this country, to such an extent that they're militarized now, they're radicalized. It reminds me of Jacobins in this country with the red caps. And I want my country back, and and obviously Joe Biden was a totally like diabolical traitor of a fellow. And he was, but at the same time, like we're being pushed. It's not just that we're selecting another option and getting away from Biden, but we're being like, the American people are being fomented into some kind of like radicalization with all this. And so there's no telling where it leads. Especially in the hands of a man that they're going to call a Protestant, and whatever happens, he's obviously very old and he's at the end of his life, which is fine. But it reminds me of like George Soros. They don't seem to have a lot of concern about the world they're going to leave after they're gone.
Well, no, they're busy serving the Pope. They're members of secret societies, and all they do is brag about some goals that they accomplished for the benefit of the Jesuit Counter-Reformation, and making the Pope the universal monarch of the world.
Yeah, no, I mean, as far as the papacy and that power structure there, it seems to me that the European Union is perfectly set to, like a clock, to like bring about the papacy. Like I'm not an expert on how it works, but with their parliament, every so often there's like a new member state or nation that's like the lead nation, and then the lead of that nation becomes like the head and the president of the European Union. So it's all set for Italy to click into place and become the lead nation, and for the papacy to become the presidency of the European Union. So I'm kind of waiting for this to happen. I feel like it's going to occur through the system as they kind of click through. Eventually, the Italy will be the head member state of the European Union, and ultimately the papacy is going to be rocking that position entirely.
Well, I think it's a restoration of the Holy Roman Empire, and the Holy Roman Empire was German. Holy Roman Emperor was generally always a German. I mean, you had The second is Spain, but as it gets older, it's German. And so when that's why they brought all those fanatical Muslims into Europe to rob, rape, murder, and pillage those white people in Germany and France and England. So the white people have enough. And when they have enough, then they have a political leader the Jesuits will control to round up all those Muslims and send them to concentration camps. Like we're going to do here. So if they have to radicalize the white men, we have to be so victimized and so beaten down, so discriminated against. Can't have any white men here. It's deliberate. That's why I always teach we have to separate from D.C. and have our own nation once again of white men who believe the Bible, historically Protestant and Baptist, and anybody else can find another country. We'll allow the Jews to live among us so we can have a blessing of the Abrahamic covenant. There's nobody else living around us. The Catholics, they can have their country. Hispanics, they can have their country. Asians, they can have their country. But we have a right to be white, to speak English, to be Bible reading, to be Protestant. We wrote all the great works of the last 500 years. We wrote all the encyclopedias, the systematic theologies, all the engineering. I mean, we have a right to sustain our history and our people. And the only way that's happening is we got to get out of this empire.
No, I agree with you 100%. This is a good time to talk about your private citizenship course. Where can people reach you and connect with you? I remember back in the day, I mean, it's kind of being lost from the knowledge of the internet. But back in the day, you know, this private citizenship course was like the straight dope on what was really going on with Washington, D.C. And so where can people connect with you and find out how to learn more about that?
Oh, they can go to my website, 247worldradio.com, and they can see I write up about it, a basic little description. And you can contact me at my email, rbpbchurch@comcast.net, or you can call me at my number, 484-238-5200, and we can talk and set up a time to have a class. I don't schedule classes anymore. I have classes when I get requests for the class, and then I schedule them.
Right.
So, basic class is 3,000. My advanced class is another 3,000. I've added a few more readings to the basic class, which make it very good. So when you're done with the first 3 days, you'll know exactly what the Jesuits did, and then you're going to know what to do to get out of it. It's a way that
Private citizenship, yeah. Do you want to talk a little bit of that? Yeah, if you want to take a few minutes and discuss it like a little bit with our audience. Sometimes I'm worried there was like an appetite for people learning about the Social Security number and the birth certificate and why their identities were like turned into this like corporate all caps persona. And I think they're little by little being dumbed down, and they just have no concept of how they're being traded and how their own life is being sold under usury under this system. So if you want to talk to us about that, go for it.
The Jesuits had always planned on making an empire of America. The Protestants founded it. Political Protestantism was set in place with the Constitution, according to Sam Adams. And Chris Pinner does a very good job with his video, The True Christian History of America. And then the Jesuits plotted to destroy this place with their secret Treaty of Verona in 1822. And so that would involve Roman Catholic immigration, massive immigration into the country. And then ultimately to divide the country between North and South over the agitation of slavery. And then on the ruins of the South, they would create a new republic, which is the Second Republic. I call it 14th Amendment America's Second Republic, where citizenship is national now, and before July 28th, 1868, it was federal. So it was federal only for white people, then it became national for whites and blacks and everybody else. So they're busy nationalizing the government, nationalizing citizenship, and hence a nationalized government. We don't have a federal government, we have a national government. So from that point on in 1868, they began to build their empire from sea to shining sea, and which meant the removal of the American Indian nations. And that war would take place for 25 years. After they decimated the South, they're going to decimate the Indian nations, and then they're going to create an empire with the robber barons, which is a very good book telling the families. Another book is called America's Irish Relays, America's Irish Manchester. And so they're making an empire of the place. But they wanted to impose a military government. So they're creating an empire, the railroads, the golden spike, the steel, the oil with Rockefeller. The robber barons are having monopolies on what's going to be necessary for a military empire. So on March 9th, 1933, actually March 6th, FDR, because of the Great Depression, which they caused, is going to declare a state of national banking emergency, which is a state of war. And he's going to use the Trading with the Enemy Act as a basis for that, which was enacted for 1917 for World War I and never repealed. So he's going to declare a national banking emergency state of war that has not ended. Proclamation 2039 has never been terminated. And then 4 days later on Thursday, Congress approves and confirms all the proclamations from March 4th to the present day. And then later on the day, the FDR puts out his Proclamation 2040 that continues Proclamation 2039 until the Commander-in-Chief issues a termination proclamation. Well, that hasn't happened. It's not going to happen. So from that time on, they begin to centralize power in Washington with the judiciary, with the executive, with the legislative.
So they do seem to be centralizing all power into this model of the unitary executive. And now, like, somehow Trump has heroically and triumphantly, like, issued more executive proclamations and executive orders than anybody in history before him. Now, like 100. Or, it's just going to continue. So do you think that this is obviously the theme? This is the model. Like, they don't really even need, like, a judiciary anymore or a Congress. They just need these emergency orders.
Right. That's why the Jesuits running Hitler did away with the Reichstag. You don't need any more German parliament. Did away with it. So Hitler became all powerful there. And so with that, because he's going to bring all the solutions. So it's the same way here. Remember, the Jesuits prepared all those executive orders for Trump. Remember, I believe it was FDR. He signed something like 3,000 of them.
Wow.
Or Obama. I mean, they just ran the country with executive orders. So they're doing it now, running it on executive orders, because it's an emergency war powers military government, and the Constitution is not a restraint on their power, because everything's done under the doctrine of necessity. And in the doctrine of necessity during war, the war powers military government can essentially do anything it wants to save the ship of war.
So so the model of checks and balances in government is just gone now. It's unrestrained.
Gone. And so therefore, if you go down to the federal district court in Miami, you'll see that building is in the shape of a ship. And you look in the aerial view, it's a ship. Well, it's a military ship. So it's the court sitting in military jurisdiction, proceeding according to the course of Admiralty procedure. And that's how they all proceed with their military flags in their courtroom.
So Admiralty law is ultimately going to be the recourse when civil government or civil society is no longer in play because you're having an extreme state of war, extreme emergency, state of emergency. Then you're in Admiralty law, martial law.
Well, martial law is on land, and there's rules for martial law, like the rules of land warfare. And then there's Admiralty, which is for law for the high seas, which is for the military and commerce. But all the lawyers have been trained in law school to function in a de facto Admiralty proceeding, even though it's not Admiralty per se. And the great work on this is called The American Admiralty by Erastus Benedict, classic work. But the jurisdiction, remember, is always military. Emergency war powers, that's Trading with the Enemy, military jurisdiction. And how they proceed in that military jurisdiction is by a jurisprudence called Admiralty jurisprudence. And so one of the keys to that is every defendant has to have a surety. Every defendant has to have a surety. And so here, your all caps is the defendant, and you, the man, are the surety. And that's how every procedure proceeds.
So when you say all caps, you're talking about the living person, my living body and mind has been transformed into a corporate charter, like a private corporation, and now my name is in all caps. That's what I get on my license, and that's what I get on my Social Security. And so this all caps corporate persona is not me, but it's represented in Admiralty.
That's right. It can only be seen in an Admiralty jurisprudence because these courts cannot see you. Federal district court cannot proceed against the man or the woman. They're always presuming They're proceeding against the legal fiction, the ens legis, the all caps entity, presuming you're trustee, surety, or obligor, until you disprove that. And that's what I teach in my class, how to separate from it, and you can prove it.
That's fascinating.
Things I teach, you want to get a name change, all uppercase, upper lowercase, do the name change, and you're going to have your DOS, Declaration of Status, and one of the most important exhibit is your release, where it's a contract, and you separate from the all caps entity. Now you put those two pieces of evidence in court, and the court cannot establish personam jurisdiction unless they want to go to a civilian due process, which is our right.
Originally, when this pursuit of getting out of becoming usury and becoming a personally indebted for the expenditures of the Federal Reserve and all the borrowing and the whatever borrowing and money they print out, ultimately we are personally responsible to repay those debts. And so this led ultimately to a pursuit of people trying to find a way to regain their original citizenship. And they used to do this, try to do this with UCC filings, like the UCC1. So can you tell us why that was ultimately a dead end?
Dead end because you can only file a UCC if you're separate from that entity. The UCC filing does not separate you from that entity. It's called the redemption process. And so it's completely worthless. I did it, but I had to learn it was incorrect. So you don't separate from that entity. Once you separate from that entity, then you file a non-UCC filing stating that you're the equitable title holder of all property held by anybody in the name and the state of the all caps entity, because you are. You have equitable title. So they continue to hold legal title, but you have equitable title as the private citizen. Here, Marstein. But the other thing I wanted to mention, when FDR proclaimed the state of national banking emergency, a state of war on March 6th, he seized all the assets, all the registered property of the country, which included all the birth certificates, all registration of cars, whatever, property, all the property registered in the county, all seized by the commander-in-chief. He has legal title to it all. And the 50 governors are nothing more than commander-in-chiefs, 50 commander-in-chiefs doing the bidding of the commander-in-chief in Washington, District of Columbia. Because all property is on a state level. So the commander-in-chief needs help of the state military governors to administer that property. And so all property records are kept on a state level.
So as we're looking forward here, I mean, how do you see things? The world is a very strange place. I know that we'll come back and revisit this, God willing, and we'll talk about it more, and we'll see more like events kind of unfold. But it looks like the Communist Chinese Party is really like intent on controlling Taiwan. Ultimately, Taiwan is where the ousted, the kind of du jour Republican Chinese government fled to when the Chinese took over, the communists took over. And they have all these claims on reuniting the homeland, and they're making all these provocative military moves. And I mean, Trump has to still kind of deal with a hot war between Ukraine and Russia. And you have the resurgence of this desire in the Muslim world in Turkey with Erdogan to like rebuild the caliphate.
Right. And
so I think, the next 5 or 10 years, as we go towards 2033, where the things are going to get totally, very interesting. So what is your view of like how things are setting up, these powder kegs?
Well, here we have the powder keg of going into the new right, and I maintain that they're going to blow the Capitol building in D.C., as we were told in the book, the John Wilkes Carlson Undercover, 1942. And then when that's blown up, then they will move the Capitol. It's already there now, but they'll move it to Denver, Colorado Springs, and that'll be the big military capital from whence to wage their two-front war. And the two-front war, as was the case with Germany, was deliberately lost by the German high command. They deliberately lost it. And we're going to be deliberately betrayed by the Pentagon, by the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the President. So that our armies will be betrayed and they're going to lose. And then when the Navy is scuttled in the Far East and the Chinese will have open waters to come right over to the coast here. And the other thing I just read recently, a defense magazine that I read, is they said if China gets supremacy in AI, which they apparently have it now, because Biden cut off all AI development here. If China has supremacy in AI, they can demand the unconditional surrender of the United States. And that makes sense to me, because they don't want to destroy the infrastructure. This is the Jesuit infrastructure they built. They want to keep it in place, all the bridges, all the interstates, they want to keep the infrastructure. They don't want to destroy it. They want to destroy the people of it.
So they're always talking about this art of war maneuver where the Chinese are desperately trying to like defeat us without firing a shot. So they keep on kind of reinstilling that notion in our minds that we're supposed to be looking forward to a defeat where we're defeated, but you know what I'm saying. So it's very strange.
Yeah, I think that there will be war. There will be war in the Far East. There will be war in the Middle East. I have a student whose son is a Navy pilot. He's ready to retire, and they called him in and they said, we wish you wouldn't retire because we're going to have a war with China in the next 2 to 3 years. And you know the Far East like the back of your hand, South China Sea. So he re-upped. So there's going to be a war there, but we're going to lose. And we're going to lose because of the military government District of Columbia will facilitate our losing. It's like the High Command in Germany. High Command in Germany made sure that the invasion of Normandy was a success. That's why they kept Rommel from putting the proper defenses at Normandy, so when they would attack, all the Allies would have been destroyed. They sent Rommel north. So they facilitated a successful Normandy invasion, and then you have a few other things like Dunkirk, where Hitler refused to destroy the French, and the Allies, 300,000 men, he couldn't destroy them all, but he allows them to escape. I mean, it's all orchestrated at the top from the Jesuit order, and when you see that these military decisions are not military decisions, they're just acts of high treason, then it makes sense. So they'll do the same thing here.
Well, that's what I thought, that they have to have individuals who are totally controlled like Biden. He's a traitor. I mean, he was perfectly in the position, like a crossing guard at a stopwalk. He was perfectly in the position to defend his country and defend his people at home and to keep the AI development moving forward. But he would stop it at such a time that it would give China the advantage. And so it's this constant treason with individuals like this. Like it's the same thing with the Clintons.
Constant treason. That's exactly right. That's why Robert E. Lee ordered the attack of Pickett's division into the guns of Roman Catholic Meade to destroy them. That's not a military command. That's a command of suicide.
Right.
So, with the traitor, Jackson was murdered. Nathan Bedford Forrest was an honest and great general. They're going to portray him as some sort of racist. So the guys who really want to win are marginalized or killed, and the guys that betray, they make heroes out of them.
Right.
So we're going to do the same thing. It's just like Eisenhower. Eisenhower was a traitor. He could have didn't have to have the Battle of Argonne Forest and go over the hills and go there and spend 4 months getting shot at by the Nazis. He could have immediately went to Berlin. Oh no, we can't win right away because we got more Jews to kill in the East. We can't end this war soon. We got another 4 or 5 months worth of killing the Jews using the Nazis.
Slow it down. Right.
Facilitating both sides with an understanding or a plan to fulfill it. They have to have traitorous generals to carry it out.
Now they've been controlling the Uniparty at the top with these well-placed Romanists. As far as they have had Nancy Pelosi, Kevin McCarthy, all the high Republican and Democrat controlling politicians were Roman Catholic, ultimately going to the same church. But it seems like now we're in this period where it's time to like burn the adversarial side. So, do you think that they'll burn their servants at this point who have been like? It reminds me of like apparently there's some information that's going to come out about the Seth Rich murder, because apparently the Clintons have like a body count, like they've been murdering people all over, they've been blowing people off, murdering people left and right all over Washington D.C. And so, does it serve the interests now of these at the top level to burn their assets in order to kind of win over the political right? I mean, they're taking apart the FBI, which I love that. So I want them to take it apart. I want them to shatter it into 1,000 pieces and start over.
Yeah, well, no, that's exactly what they're going to do. This is the military, and military commanders have to make the difficult decision of sacrificing their own men at certain times, and they'll do it. So the Jesuit general says, well, we need to sacrifice a certain amount of our soldiers here. We'll do that for the greater glory of God, ad majorem Dei gloriam, and they're going to do the same thing with the soldiers and the military.
In order to further the other side. And ultimately in a dialectic, in a Hegelian dialectic, you're using both sides in the most kind of like militaristic and violent way anyway. So you're not really beholden to the Republicans or the Democrats. You're using them against each other to create conflict.
Create the synthesis that you want, the outcome that you want. The outcome that they wanted is new right, quasi-fascism, as Martin Lee wrote, and also the book, The Neo-Catholics. They better come on.
Outstanding. So let's talk a little bit about your new upcoming book, March 9th, 1933, When the Jesuits Captured America. This is kind of your working title. I know you're still working on it, but tell us more about because your first book, or one of your first books, I would say, in your writings is Vatican Assassins, Wounded in the House of My Friends, but now we're going to kind of step up to the next level and go a little bit deeper into the subject matter.
Right. I want everybody to know, I want the common man to know that the Jesuits took over this country, ousted the civilian government, and replaced it with a military government on March 9th, 1933. That has to become common knowledge. Everybody just talks about, well, the Jesuits were a threat to our country. No, the Jesuits took our country on March 9th, 1933. And I showed from a conference that they had in 1852 in Buffalo, New York, that we, like you, intend to conquer the United States.
Right.
So they did it on March 9th, 1933. They used their faithful apostate Protestant 32nd degree Freemason FDR to do it. He was overseen by Jesuit Edmund Walsh when he did it that day. He was there on the stand with FDR. And so when the Jesuits took it, then everything changes. Then the following Monday, that was done on a Thursday, the banks were closed again on Friday. Everything opened on Monday, the 13th. And it was a new nation with a centralized banking system, with a new national government that was military. Everything changed.
Yeah, I found it shocking whenever you pointed out, not to go too deeply into, to give too many of the details of your research away, but there's some old black and white video FDR up there, and he's talking about the consecration of a nation, and then all around him are all these Knights of Columbus, and they're sitting there, and I'm like, and it's the old video that you always see with like World War II footage. It's always there, it's always ingrained in your mind, and when you look at it carefully, you see what's there, and it's very shocking to kind of realize it.
Columbus behind FDR, all waving their heads around, their hats around, letting the Catholics know that even though FDR is a Protestant, we got him.
So the question of, as far as like the incoming military government, what is it? I guess that answers it.
That answers it.
Right.
It's absolutism. We have a constitutional dictatorship. Since that day, the commander-in-chief is real power, not the president. He's always commander-in-chief now. That's why they play Hail to the Chief. That's why they changed the inauguration date from March 4th to January 20th. January 20th, with the 20th Amendment, is the day they would inaugurate the commander-in-chief. The first term of FDR is the last time any president was inaugurated on March 4th.
That's the changeover.
Over.
Now, also, just as we kind of wrapping up our hour with you here, it's interesting to point out that with FDR, his connection with the esoteric clubs in America, and as far as 1933, if we go back and look at with the Federal Reserve, that was kind of the 1933 is going to be kind of the coup de grace, but it really is going to be set up in 1913 when they put in the Federal Reserve System, and they're going to have this kind of false dichotomy between the Aldrich Act, and of course they're controlling the right and the left again, or the Federal Reserve System. Either choice ultimately would have led to the same kind of outcome. But that is because America, by 1913, had forgotten its history of what it had dealt with central banks in the past, and how Andrew Jackson had killed the bank, and he got rid of a centralized banking system controlled by City of London. And so at this point, by 1913, the people are being kind of ready to be sandwiched again with another central bank scenario.
And a war. World War I was on the verge. You have to. Now all the attention was going on for World War I. So in that context, they will declare the Federal Reserve to be passed in December of 1913, and in October, 7 months later, World War I is going to start. So they've got everything in place for that, but the Federal Reserve Bank didn't have all power until 1935. 1935 is when they passed the Banking Act, and they created the Board of Governors in District of Columbia. And that's when they centralized all banking power in the Federal Reserve. 1935 with the Banking Act. It's important you remember that.
No, that's fascinating.
One more thing.
Yes, sir.
One more thing. 27, William T. McFadden said, well, the Federal Reserve done such a good job in keeping the economy going that the Federal Reserve Charter needs to have no expiration date. And so it was for 20 years, from 13 to 1933. But 1927, the Jesuits said, okay, we got to keep this charter ongoing forever. And they did that at 1927 when Louis T. McFadden led the Congress to extend the charter without an end, without limit. So the Federal Reserve Charter has no end to it.
Yeah, the Federal Reserve System, it's fascinating because right now it's set up where we've gone off the gold standard, so we have this kind of devaluating fiat imaginary paper money, but it's still it's a weird place in the development of this because we're still the global reserve currency. So I know BRICS nations are out there trying to find a way to get around this kind of domination, and of course Trump is telling them that they'll get 100% tariff if they try to use any other currency. So this issue is by no means addressed, and they haven't shored up the Federal Reserve to give it back more value or to. So it's like we're the whole world is in hock to this system of usury.
I maintain. Remember, the Jesuits are the greatest usurers in the world, not the Jews. They're the greatest usurers. You want to read about Jesuit usury? Get the book. The great German historian Theodor Greisinger wrote about the history of the Jesuits as told to the German people. And it was written in 1873. And he tells about Jesuit usury, a whole big chapter on Jesuit usury. So they put it in place in 13, but there were still other banks, and they still had gold and silver circulating. They still had banknotes, but they didn't have a monopoly until 33 when they withdrew the gold, and then the Federal Reserve would become the central bank in 1935. But in 1927, I said, remember, they extended the charter forever, and then in 1927, they created the American branch of the Knights of Malta out of New York City.
Right. Now, this is an important period of time because this is the 1920s, right, when they're having the anti-Masonry party is breaking out across America because they had the John Morgan affair. And John Morgan was an individual who was a Freemason who was going to expose the secrets of Freemasonry, and he was murdered. And the backlash over his murder was so great that they had to a lot of the Freemason lodges dismembered or disassociated, if you want. And
that happened.
Yeah.
Sean.
Say again.
That was 20s, not the 1900s.
Right, 1820s is what I'm talking about. Right.
Right, and so the whole William Morgan affair was a concoction of the Jesuits.
William Morgan affair. Yeah.
If you get the book 30 Years in Hell, written by a priest that came out, he was saved. He wrote 30 Years in Hell, and he published it, and he showed that this whole Morgan affair was a concoction of Rome to put down the Protestants and the Freemasons so the Catholics could take the vote.
Well, they certainly did take over because after that point would be the installation of the Ultramontane Skull and Bones Order in 1833, and they would take over whatever influence that the lodges had in politics was going to be totally taken over by that vacuum there. And I think that the Skull and Bones Order is just like a fraternal entryway into the Knights of Malta.
No doubt. I mean, you got William F. Buckley, you got Henry Luce, you got other guys who are all Knights of Malta and Skull and Bones.
Yeah.
So it's surely the most powerful secret society in the country. I mean, you read Sutton's work and you just come away with all the names he gives and how they controlled Joseph Stalin. They were advising Stalin with Avery Dulles, another Knight of Malta, Skull and Bones. So, yeah.
it's shocking that it wasn't until Anthony Sutton is going to publish this book, and then maybe even like 10 or 15 years after he publishes it, it's still really quiet, and apparently not very many people read it or something, and no one really knows this information, which is so crucial.
He gave his life to write those 3 books. You can get them all in one book. I mentioned previous broadcast. FDR on Wall Street and the Rise of the Bolshevik Revolution, Wall Street and the Rise of Hitler, and
Introduction to the Order.
Wall Street and the Bolshevik Revolution, the Rise of Hitler, and Rise of the FDR, and then Skull and Bones, America's Secret Society.
Yeah.
So 4 works of his are classic. He was irrefutable. He had all of his facts. He also wrote another great book called National Suicide.
I got to write that one down. Yeah.
National Suicide, Military Aid to the Soviet Union. That's right. And when I was involved with the Birch Society, that was a big book they pushed, which was true.
All right, my brother. Well, it's been an hour that we got to spend with you again. I know you're a very busy man, and I really appreciate the time that you spend with us. It's really crucial, and your insight. Anything you want to leave with us as we kind of go forward? It's 2025. We have the Trump administration for 4 years, and they're like totally white hot. They're removing people. They're doing all kinds of stuff. The roundups have officially begun.
Yeah, not begun yet, but I'm sure it will be. Well, the important thing is your listeners all need to be saved. They need to truly believe the gospel of Jesus Christ, and He died for their sins, was buried, and rose again. God calls all men to repent, to have a change of mind and heart, believe in the gospel, and then secondly, to live a pure life, and thirdly, then to resist this satanic plot in the destruction of our country, which is we're very close to the verge of it. So that's what we need to do.
Amen.
Keep your health.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, well, I hope we'll talk again soon. You have a wonderful night, and talk again soon, brother.
Thanks, Sean. Lord bless, brother.
Lord bless.
Bye.
Bye.